So what is that common sense view that Russell wants to defend, to make respectable, to argue for, if not absolutely positively prove the truth of, but at least to defend and to argue that it's the most likely hypothesis for the way things are in our relationship with the world? He says, one great reason why it is felt that we must secure a physical object in addition to the sense data is that we want the same object for different people. That is, and he goes on to describe, people sitting down at a dinner table, and they're all having different sense data. That is, if they all look at the dinner table, they're all actually seeing different things from different points of view under slightly different conditions. Their sense data are different, but our common sense tells us that they're all sense data relating to a common object, what he calls a public neutral object. That is, we believe that there are things in the world and that we all see them differently because we're different, or we see them from different points of view or under different conditions at different times, but that the objects themselves are public in the sense that we're all seeing, all of us are seeing the same thing, maybe in different ways, but there's a public neutral central object that we all see, and that this is incredibly important for our common sense view of the world. For instance, he talks about buying a table from someone. He says, I bought my table from the former occupant of my room. I could not buy his sense data, which died when he went away, but I could and did buy the confident expectation of more or less similar sense data. Thus, it is the fact that different people have similar sense data, and that one person in a given place at different times has similar sense data, which makes us suppose that over and above the sense data, there is a permanent public object which underlies or causes the sense data of various people at various times. That is, that we all, again, we can't share our sense data. Those are absolutely private to our own subjective experience. Each one of us has exclusive experience of his or her own sense data, but that we can all experience the same public objects. I can buy a table from you. I can't buy your sense data of the table, but I can buy your table from you, or you can buy it from me, and it's the same table. It's a public neutral object. Well, of course, he says that to assume all this is to beg the question at issue. That is, to assume as true that there are such objects that are common to us all, the so-called public neutral objects. It's not a proof of it at all. He says we cannot appeal to the testimony of other people, since this testimony itself consists of sense data and does not reveal their people's experiences, unless our own sense data are signs of things existing independently of us. That is, other people, of course, are external to us, and on the basis of our own private sense data, we cannot be absolutely sure that they exist, since all that we can experience directly and immediately are our sense data, which we presume relate to them. He says we must therefore, if possible, find in our own purely private experiences characteristics which show, or tend to show, that there are in the world things other than ourselves and our private experiences. Again, he then goes on to say that, although he does believe that there is such a public world, a neutral world of matter and objects and things external to him, he could never possibly prove the existence of these things. He says, for instance, it's not logically impossible that his experiences are all that exist. There is no reason whatever to suppose, however, that it is true. I'll read the whole thing, I'm sorry. He says, there is no logical impossibility in the supposition that the whole of life is a dream in which we ourselves create all the objects that come before us. But although this is not logically impossible, there is no reason whatever to suppose that it is true. And it is in fact a less simple hypothesis viewed as a means of accounting for the facts of our own life, then the common sense hypothesis that there really are objects independent of us whose action on us causes our sensations. That is, there's no logical impossibility to say that, well, all that exists are my subjective experiences, the sense data that come for me. There's no logical impossibility. It doesn't contradict itself. That is, it is possible. It's not an impossibility. However, what he's saying there is that it's so incredibly sort of unlikely, improbable, and really a kind of a lavish, extravagant way of accounting for my experience, and it's actually just much simpler to say that my sense data are caused by objects external to me, that they are in one way or another signs of external objects, and despite the lack of absolute proof, it just is the simplest way of accounting for my experience of the world. That is to say that there is an external world, that I am in a relation to it. I am in relation to it through or mediated by the sense data that I am immediately aware of. And that, yes, that the world is populated by things. Just think of how complicated our way of talking about the world would be if we had to always say that our words applied to sense data and not to actual physical objects external to us. He talks about a cat, for instance. He says, if the cat appears at one moment in one part of the room and at another in another part, it is natural to suppose, common sense, instinctive almost, he says, natural to suppose that it has moved from the one to the other, passing over a series of intermediate positions. But if it is merely a set of sense data, it cannot have ever been in any place where I did not see it. Thus we shall have to suppose that it did not exist at all while I was not looking, but suddenly sprang into being in a new place. If the cat exists whether I see it or not, we can understand from our own experience how it gets hungry between one meal and the next. But if it does not exist when I am not seeing it, it seems odd that appetite should grow during non-existence as fast as during existence. And if the cat consists only of sense data, that is my sense data, it cannot be hungry, since no hunger but my own can be a sense data to me. Thus the behavior of the sense data, which represent the cat to me, though it seems quite natural when regarded as an expression of hunger, becomes utterly inexplicable when regarded as mere movements and changes of patches of color, which are as incapable of hunger as a triangle is of playing football. That is, when we talk about the world, we talk about the world and things in the world. We don't talk about our sense data except in very particular philosophical circumstances when we are analyzing these things. So I think what Russell is arguing here is that our whole sort of structure of thinking, our use of language especially, our whole sort of common sense way of going about things, it militates towards the idea or the truth that there are external objects in the world which are different from my sense data and have an independent existence from me. He calls this an instinctive belief. He says, of course, it is not by argument that we originally come by our belief in an independent external world. We find this belief ready in ourselves as soon as we begin to reflect. It is what may be called an instinctive belief. And then he goes on to say that, well, what philosophy does is it points out these instinctive beliefs. He shows how these instinctive beliefs, these basic beliefs about reality that we seem to already have, how they relate to each other. And he also argues that we shouldn't give up these basic beliefs, for instance, this belief about the reality of the external world, unless in some way or another they clash with another belief. So whether Russell has actually proved that there is an external world, well, by his own admission, he hasn't, because you can't. But what he's tried to argue for is that our normal, instinctive, common sense belief that we are in relation to an external world, matter, physical objects, is completely respectable.